Hello there and welcome to 2018. I hope that everybody's had a good time over the celebration period and they're ready for the new year. And we're kicking the new year off with the first video. Well, it's actually the last video in a series of our Powers of Life series where we've gone over some of the symbolism of the Venus figures with their chthonic fertility powers, and we've also addressed the matters of consumption as it pertains to animals and how that reveals itself in the symbolic record. And now what I want to do is close off that portion of the series by looking at a peculiar item of symbolism that synthesizes both of these elements, that of belonging to the powers of the earth and whose life dynamic provides a symbolic mirror that reflects back onto our own, and that naturally by the title of this video is the symbolism of plant life. Plants have this possessive power over our hearts and minds. If we see depictions of plants in children's media and cartoons, we often see them rendered not as they are in nature, but as being like people. And I think that this speaks a lot to the unconscious way that many people relate to plants as if they were intelligent beings. We either feel like we sense an intelligence within these plants, or we are projecting an aspect of our own intelligence into the plant whilst we're observing it symbolically, which I think is more likely to be the case. We experience the plant realistically as part of the chain of life that feeds into the planet's biosphere, and we also experience the plant hyper-realistically as a symbol of life progression, because in its metamorphosis we see a barometer of the seasonal shift, and we perceive an organic system that seems to live, die, and be reborn again continually. These factors obviously make plants key subjects for symbolic reference, because not only are they abundant and all around us in the environment, the brain can very easily find and associate motifs from plant metamorphosis over into its interests concerning the patterns of life and death, and rebirth as well, of course. So we should be able to notice some key things going in here. For something to become a symbol, it has to possess interesting forms that spark novelty. And this novelty then triggers associations into alternative matters of interest that the brain sees parallels in. And this then creates a complex of forms and interests that the brain then uses to generate a symbolic style of communication. All symbols are informed by a three-part process, which we could call the 3 C's, and they are complex, combination, and communication. And that's essentially what a symbol is. It's a complex of forms that combine to communicate something. So when we look at living subjects such as plants, we don't only perceive an organic system that can be dissected and categorized, we also perceive symbolic aspects in that subject as well. And the fact that this is so automatic and intuitive and unquestioned by us speaks to me that we have in no sense lost this symbolic way of reading into the world. In fact, when we look at subjects in artistic representation, advertising, and logo media, we see these associative complexes in effect, and the reason why we find communion in them so intuitively speaks to this fact that I will keep on hammering home in these videos. Human beings are stratified creatures. We carry a stack of inherited developments that reach all the way back from our animal record into the present day. So this modern pretense that some people possess that we have in some way transcended past dispositions through illuminated discourse doesn't bear any light to me at all when we consider the realities of our own organic inheritance. We are stratified, meaning that past inheritance lives on inside of us. And like the roots of a tree that we do not see, grows upwards and outwards and extends its branches into the present moment. And you can hear that I'm deliberately using a lot of symbolic metaphor to articulate this, and our capacity to understand that language without hesitation speaks to the reality that I'm trying to communicate here, that the prerequisites for this symbolic style of communication are predetermined as a condition of our organic inheritance. So yeah, we can definitely say that this capacity for symbolic creation and indeed symbolic interpretation in the mind is a carryover from an older way of reading into the world, a way of reading into the world that associates disembodied forms together to form complexes, and the synthesis of those complexes communicates a message that is in some way important to us. Alright then, so now with what we've just said in mind, I want to go over some examples now from around the world about how this vegetable symbolism shows up in the cultural record. And as an introduction to that, I just want to say a few things about why plants have been selected as the symbolic ambassadors for the life cycle. Plant life is a very fitting candidate for symbolically communicating the patterns of life cycles, because we see in them a novel example of that progression represented in the metamorphosis of a plant. A plant emerges from the invisible, from that which we do not see, beneath the buried earth, and then it receives the sunlight and the life-giving water that falls down from the sky, and then subsequently seems to grow in its life upwards towards that sky. The seasons change, and so do the appearances of the plants. Winter comes back around and the plants retreat, only to return again in the following year to repeat that cycle. So we see in the plant's development the archetype of our own metamorphosis, and therefore human minds across the entire globe have selected it as the symbol of that metamorphosis. Tree worship was a very common practice in pre-Christian Europe, and the religious progenitor of this expression probably speaks to a kind of animism, actually. Animism being that intuition of a hidden vitality or a life essence within environmental subjects that awards those subjects with a kind of animating soul or a spirit, and also, it has to be said, something that possesses an intelligence that can be communicated with and appealed to by other human minds. And whenever we talk about this subject of animism, my mind's always returned to when you see children drawing faces in diagrams of the sun, or in flowers like the daisy flower, and they'll put a little smiley face in the middle of it. And when I never actually gave that any kind of thought, which again I think speaks to just how intuitive and how natural this kind of symbolic and projection type of reading into the world is so kind of natural to us when we're younger and when we're older as well. Though when I actually found out about animism later and I started looking into these subjects a bit more, I started seeing these things in a new light, and I definitely think that you could produce an argument out of that kind of practice of drawing human faces in environmental subjects that don't originally possess them, and actually associate that back to a kind of form of animism. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there about the animism thing. It might actually have some interesting reference for what we're actually talking about here with plants. But returning back to the plants, I want to also talk about sacred trees in the Hindu religion. The most sacred tree, there are actually a lot of them actually, but the most sacred one is called the Ashvatha. That is commonly known as the peepal tree. And this is a tree that Lord Krishna died under, initiating the process of the Kali Yuga. These trees often have a red cloth tied around their circumference to signify their religious significance. So cutting down one of these trees is considered to be an act of sacrilege. And I also want to talk about an old practice that still goes on here in England every year called the Jack in the Green. And the Jack in the Green actually stretches back a few hundred years, actually. It may even go back even further, we don't know. But the earliest time that I've been able to trace this practice actually goes back to the 17th century. And basically what the Jack in the Green is there's this huge procession which back in the day was apparently much more rowdy, and there was a lot of drunkenness and a lot of feasting involved in it. And so you'd have these revelers kind of walking through the town on the May Day celebration, in fact. And then the Jack of the Green would be this individual who decided to dress up as a tree. And he was the Jack of the Green. And you see in some of these pictures, he actually is an entire tree in some of them, like a conifer or something like that. And this is quite an interesting little practice, because that here again, I can read into these associations of animism and trying to bring an animating life into these natural forms. And so by the human adorning itself in the mantle of the vegetable, we could say, and occupying the figure of that plant form, he's animating that figure with his own life essence and bringing it to dance and to move within that system. And therefore it awards that tree, even though it's only a costume, a kind of novel significance. And the symbolic mind is definitely at work here. When we see a man dressed up as a tree in a ritual or in some folk custom setting, we don't find any internal conflict with that. We don't find any conflict with that situation at all, because we unconsciously understand the context for it. And the reason why we understand the context for it is because we're reading into the world with an older style of filter, one that has its own rhyme and its own reason and its own shortcomings. And this symbolic style of reading into the world was preset at the time that you were born, and it will be there in those that come after you, and it will repeatedly find communion in the cultural expressions that speak back to it, because it's an organic part of what we are. And I really want to drive that home in these videos. So let's wrap up then this 3-part primer into the powers of life concerning vegetable symbolism. I think that looking back on some of these videos that I've done in the power of life, I originally conceived them as being just individual windows into various aspects of symbolism. But as I actually started making them, I realized that they actually metamorphosed themselves and took on a new form. And through these different videos, I think that what I've really been articulating isn't so much in the primary sense these particular symbolic expressions. I think these symbolic expressions have actually served in their own way in these different videos to, in their own way, communicate the fundamental architecture of symbolism. So in other words, I think that these videos have been primers on symbolism, if it's fair to call it that. And if there's only one thing out of all of the things that I've communicated in these videos, it would be this one core element: that the complexities of life exert a psychological hold over the mind, and that psychological influence has to be reconciled with in some way. We can't simply rationalize these things away and operate under the delusion that we've transcended them through logic somehow. No, because anything of import to the human life experience, whether it's in a primitive society 15,000 years ago, or whether it's in a modern metropolis like Beijing in 2018, will inevitably have to be processed and retranslated by the mind into alternative forms that aid in the process of bringing our mind to terms with complexity. And the most age-old way that we can reconcile with complexity is through what we're doing now, which is through communication, verbal communication. Because when we communicate about something, we're trying to contain complexity. We codify it into an intelligible impression. And through that, we strip out all of the noise and all of the ambiguity that's previously obfuscated our ability to reach a position of clarity about that particular problem. And once we've achieved that, then we're stimulated by that clarity and we're in a better position to be able to form new strategies around those life situations. So we could say that communication is the gateway to clarity, and clarity provides the access to strategy. And in order to make that work, we obviously need the ability to communicate effectively, and that depends on our ability to be able to translate complexity into intelligible subjects so that we can more effectively receive the message that's held within them. Speaking verbally is obviously a highly effective way of doing this, of course, but also is the ability, this profound human ability, to be able to codify and retranslate experience into alternative media such as sound and vision. And that ability forms the bedrock of our symbolic language. And this is really significant because this ability to retranslate life experiences into alternative media lends us other arms to our arsenal of communication. And that aids in the ability to reconcile with and address complex experience. I see symbolism as it is expressed in art and music and in folk custom and in drama, of course. I see this very much as styles of primitive technology that facilitates alternative styles of communication. It forms an extension of the brain's ability. No, it forms an extension of the brain's technology to draw together subjects into novel configurations of form that convey something important to the intelligence of not only our own, but also to other human minds. And the advantage that alternative media, such as sound and vision and drama, possesses over common description is that it speaks through the language of novelty, and that novelty stimulates the brain into developing new life strategies around that central issue. And so, yeah, that's what I'd really like us to take away from with this Powers of Life video. Life has to be reconciled with, and one of the ways that we go about ordering that reconciliation is by representing complexity in new and novel ways through sound, through vision, through drama, through interesting patterns of language. And through that, we afford the brain new mental modules, new mental maps and abilities to ways to strategize around problems around us. And so I think that's quite a nice thing to close upon with these last Powers of Life videos. We've got one more to do with Powers of Death. That's going to be an interesting one. I don't know quite yet what I'm going to do for that. That one we'll have to see. But for now, I'm going to wrap this up. I won't hold you anymore. Like I said, really enthusiastic about 2018. I'm looking forward to a lot of the projects that I've got going this year. So as usual, thanks very much for watching this, and I'll see you again in the next one.